Hey everybody, it's Lori and I'm here today with Eva and Charlotte, and we are going to give a book review and discussion of the book Lifeboat 12 by Susan Hood. This is a middle grade novel and it was published in 2018. The author, Susan Hood, this is her first middle grade novel. She's written quite a few picture books and has earned quite a few awards for them. And it's published by Simon & Schuster. So, the first thing you need to know about Lifeboat 12 is kind of the premise behind it. So, Eva, do you want to explain the premise?
Sure. It's World War II, and the British think that the Germans are going to start invading Britain because they have just invaded Poland.
I think maybe it was France. They had invaded
Yes.
France. They were invading a lot of people. It's hard to keep track.
Yes. They had just invaded France, so the British were worried that the Germans were going to invade them next. So they started evacuating lots of children on boats to, Canada, for instance.
Yeah, it sounds like they went to Canada and New Zealand and Australia and South Africa. Pretty much all of the British colonies. Is that... I think that's the word I'm looking for. And then, Charlotte, what is the interesting thing about the writing style of this book?
It's sort of written in poetry.
Yes. So, it is written in verse. It's not rhyming poetry, but it is written in verse. And Eva picked this book out because it's about World War II.
And it has a pretty cover.
And then she made Charlotte read it.
Yes.
And Charlotte, you were interested in it because why?
Well, I just liked the idea of surviving on a boat without, supplies that were useful.
Okay, so you were, into the survival story
Yes.
part. Okay. And then they told me I needed to read it, and Charlotte pretty much spoiled the ending for me, and so I was like, why would I want to read that? That sounds really depressing, whatever. Some specific parts of the ending are depressing, and Little Miss Loudmouth over there was like, it's so sad, blah, 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 blah. So now she'll spoil every book for you if you let her.
You said you didn't want to read it because it sounded depressing, so I spoiled the ending for you because you weren't going to read it.
Yeah, you should never go with she's not going to read it, because she probably is. Especially now, because now that we have a YouTube channel, we can be like, but we could do a book discussion, and therefore she needs to read it.
True. And basically that was kind of what convinced me to read it. But I'm going to say the number one reason why I picked it up was because it is written in verse, and I am a sucker for books written in verse. As these girls probably know, because I'm always like, you need to read this, and this, and this. So, it's similar in style to Out of the Dust by Karen Hennessy, and Maybe by Carolyn Starr Rose. I have another one of her books that I'm ready to read too. Not the same. Both of those books are kind of set in kind of like the American Dust Bowl, so there's plenty of depressing stuff going around there. But this one's World War II, Eva's favorite depressing time period.
Okay, is Maybe set in the Dust Bowl? I thought it was a pioneer story. I'm pretty sure.
Anyway, okay, so apparently they're both American Western stories. Is that fair? Yes. And this one's British, so not American. I think you should read this book because it is written in verse, a quick read, and lots of fun. Eva, do you think they should read this book?
Yes, I do think you should read this book, but not because it's tons of fun, because it's not. I mean, it's fun to read, but it's not a funny story. But
I didn't mean fun, I said fun.
But because I think you should read this because it's a very interesting story, and it is based on a true story also. So, it's not just some fantasy book you're reading.
Yeah, so it's historical fiction.
Yes.
But based particularly on a particular event with a particular person.
Who actually was in the event. That's one of the most interesting things I think about this book. Because a lot of times in historical fiction, they'll make up this random character that lives during that period.
I found it really cool that the author got to interview the main character about what his life was like during that point of time.
Okay. So the question, however, Charlotte, is would you recommend this book and why?
Of course I would. It's awesome. And
why is it awesome?
I'm not sure. It's just so interesting, and it's telling a story, but it's also telling you what happened and the history of it.
Before we get into our discussion and get into kind of spoilery things, it's kind of broken up into chunks. So basically what happened is a boy is sent on a ship and it's bound for Canada, and there are 90 kids on that ship, I think. And so it's the process. It starts with them being selected and then traveling, and then the ship ends up being torpedoed. And I don't think this is a spoiler because the title of it is Lifeboat 12. So clearly lifeboats were engaged. So all the lifeboats are engaged, and the character we follow ends up in Lifeboat 12. So it follows the 12th lifeboat, which is the only one that doesn't really fill up with water, so it's not with the other lifeboats when
it traveled
rescue
faster.
happens. It moved faster, so they kind of got separated from all of the other survivors. So we have the beginning section, which is called Escape. So I like this. I like when books are separated like this. Anybody else like this? Is this just me? Am I just weird?
I like it. I like how, it's
Pretty it is.
Yeah, pretty.
And it's very easy to find where a section ends because you can see the black page.
True.
That's why I like it. And then the second section is called Adrift, when they're in the lifeboat. And then the third section, this might be slightly spoilery, so if you don't want any spoilers about what happens, although I guess we did say they interviewed the guy, so I guess the rescue is kind of implied. So it's broken down into those three sections, and then at the end it has a very cool section, like an appendix about all of the interviews and facts and everything. So and that's this final section. It's just all historical notes and
photos.
And
the photos were
the
awesome.
photos were pretty cool. So, okay. So now we're getting into spoilers. So we're going to discuss what we thought of this book. And now is the time when Charlotte's going to say all those things that you might not want to hear if you haven't read it. So if you haven't read it, I do advise you go find it and you go read it. And then you can come back and listen to us discuss it. So let's start with our main character. Our main character is Kenneth Sparks. I can't remember now. He got an official letter in the mail. Actually, his dad got an official letter in the mail, and he opened it and got in trouble with his stepmother. But his mother died when he was born, basically. And he has a little sister and a stepmother and a dad, and they live in London, I believe.
Or pretty near
Yeah,
London.
it's got to be close to it.
They could hear the bombings from the Blitz where they lived,
Yes,
but they weren't inside London itself, I do not think.
Apparently, you have to apply to have your kids go away, and they will take kids between the ages of 5 and
18, I think.
That was like 15.
Maybe it was 14.
Maybe it was 14, because Ken is like 12 or 13. He's one of the oldest, right? Okay, so his little sister isn't eligible to go, so they couldn't apply for her. So he how does he feel about being picked for this?
He hates it because he doesn't want to leave without having any say in it. But as time goes on, he really dislikes his stepmother, so he's like, maybe this won't be too bad getting away from her and having an adventure in Canada.
thoughts on Ken and his relationship with his family?
It kind of drove me crazy. I think we have a better family relationship than most families do. I don't know for sure. But in the books, the family relationships are always awful.
That is a pretty common book sort of thing. So he doesn't feel like his stepmom really likes him. But we do find out in the end that she cares for him more than he thought she did, because she was very, like...
She said something like, now we can look at his bike without crying.
Yeah.
And
she was much sadder than he thought she would be when, it was kind of reported that he was probably dead, because of the rescue situation, so when he gets back. So what's the kind of pivotal moment with his stepmother that kind of changes his whole story?
The coat.
The coat. So he needs a new winter coat.
Uh-huh.
Was his too small, or?
I think it was getting too small, yeah.
Kids do that. They grow out of their winter coats a lot. So they have to go to a used shop because, of course, everything is being rationed and you can't just go buy a coat. And nobody has a lot of money. So they find this coat, and it costs more than his stepmom really wants to spend. But she does anyway, and she tells him, what, Eva?
She tells him that if he loses it, he is going to, be in so much trouble.
He's threatened a little bit about, you keep track of that coat. So, the process for getting on the boat wasn't as straightforward as I kind of expected it to be. You would think that, okay, so they're going to evacuate these kids, so you drop the kids off, the kids get taken to a boat, and the kids are on the boat. But what was the process kind of like?
They start on a train, and then they got on a bus, and then they went to an orphanage, and then they stayed at the orphanage for a while, and then they got on another train, and then went to the boat.
It seems like...
And then, the boat got stopped midway through. They couldn't leave, the channel or something.
Yeah. Yeah, so they had multiple stops along the way, and it was hurry up and wait quite a bit. So one of the things that they did in the orphanage was have basically a doctor look at all the kids. Mm-hmm. And they had to be healthy enough to travel. So at least one boy got sent back home.
Because he had spent, the whole time crying.
He was not happy.
He wanted to get sent home. And how did he, he spent too much time outside or something and got a cold?
I think he just basically... Home? Yeah, he had a cold or something, and it was the happiest cold of his life, probably, because he got to go back home. So they finally get on board, and they're all set, but then they can't leave because...
There are bombers.
Yeah, there. Of course, there's going to be lots of concerns. Oh, and with the train, when they were on the train to, evacuate the train midway through their train journey, too. So it was kind of perilous, the journey to the boat. What day were they allowed to leave?
I don't remember.
Really?
From the boat? From what?
Yeah, the boat.
Oh, the 13th.
Yeah. Wasn't it Friday the 13th?
Yeah.
Yep, so an unlucky day, and normally the sailors would have been no, we're not leaving on Friday the 13th, but they really didn't have a choice. So they left on Friday the 13th, because that's when they could be escorted. So all of these ships were escorted by a destroyer and other ships.
A whole convoy.
There was a convoy. What did they do to avoid enemy fire while they were being escorted? Do you remember, Charlotte?
No.
Ken figured it out.
It's been a while.
Oh, they zigzagged through the water.
Yeah, they would do a zigzag pattern. And then after, what was it, 3 or 4 days?
I think so.
Yeah, not very many.
They felt like they were far enough out that they didn't have to worry about U-boats anymore. So the rest, they were still part of a convoy of merchant ships, but the destroyer and all the guard ships, all the military ships left. And then, so what did the kids think of the boat, first off?
They loved it. Like, they had so much food, so much more food than they were used
And
to
toys and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, they had a really nice play area, lots of food.
now. Lots of ice cream.
They could eat as much as they wanted, which wasn't happening at home with rationing. What did they have to wear during the first part of the journey?
They had to wear their life vests, right?
Constantly.
Yeah, they had like 2 life vests too, like one
That they...
that like was strapped around their waist or something, and one on their chest, and they weren't allowed to take one of them off at all, and the other one they had to hang at the end of their bed, and they weren't allowed to change into pajamas. They had to wear their clothes. But then they got past where they thought U-boats wouldn't be. The military boats left, and then what were they allowed to do?
Take off the life vests.
So what do you think about that decision?
That's not a very smart decision to me, because I think they completely forgot about, like, fire from the air. Enemy fire from the air.
I don't know, like, the life vest, sure, it might have saved some kids who couldn't swim, and that would have been really good, but at the same time, the water was probably cold enough that it didn't make too much of a difference either way.
It was kind of interesting how they went from you have to wear 2 life vests at all times to like, yeah, we're fine now, just wear whatever. It was kind of a weird
Transition.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe if they had just worn, like, I don't know, maybe the smaller life vest during the night or something instead of the big, hefty one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was interesting. So the kids are having a pretty good time on the boat. They're getting into some mischief and causing mild amounts of nothing major, but being places they're not supposed to be. Pretty much acting like kids, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what did they think? Staff, the ship people, were all very nice to the boys.
And dealt with their shenanigans.
Yeah. Sometimes, like, we're like, hey, you're not supposed to be there, sort of thing. And then comes a night when, we forgot about brothers. So there's a couple of pairs of brothers. This is where it gets sad. So 2 of the boys have younger brothers. And both younger brothers come down with, like, a cold or...
Chicken pox.
Oh, it was chicken pox, that's right. They had spots, so they were sent to the infirmary. And so they were separated from their older brothers because they were sick. And both boys were told by their mothers to watch out for their little brothers. There were also girls, right?
Yes, there were
Yeah,
some
there were
girls.
girls, but
Yeah.
there was one who had been on the other ship, been bombed and sent back to get on the
Oh, that's
ship.
right. Was that a brother and a sister or 2 sisters?
Brother and a sister.
I think
They were on another ship that got torpedoed and sent to this ship also
Yeah.
got torpedoed.
Yeah, and the reason they were rescued on the first ship, and pretty much they rescued all the kids on that ship.
Yes.
I think so,
Like,
except one.
Every passenger on the ship but one, maybe. And maybe that was a crew member. I can't remember. But, like, it was a very good rescue of that ship. And then they were brought back, and they were supposed to be sent home to their families. But this particular brother and sister's families had their house bombed. So they were squeezed onto this ship with the group of kids that were supposed to be going. We don't really follow any of the girls in the book, though.
Because none of them ended up on Lifeboat 12.
Right, because we're following Lifeboat 12. But they do have some chaperones. One of them is a Catholic priest. And so he's got a little bit of like a cold or a flu going on. He's not feeling very well. And the military leaves. Their boat is torpedoed, as is one other boat in the convoy, correct?
I think so.
They're supposed to scatter if torpedoing happens. So rather than rescuing people out of fear that they would be torpedoed too, they're supposed to kind of all go different directions. So all the other boats are not there anymore. And you got 2 that have been torpedoed. So what happens in the whole torpedoing?
So everyone's supposed to go to their assigned lifeboat, and Ken was assigned Lifeboat 8. But when he was rushing to Lifeboat 8, he remembered that he had left his coat behind. And if he survived this, he wasn't sure he would survive his stepmother's wrath.
Yes, the wrath of the stepmom was on his mind.
So he went back to grab his coat, and he ended up getting back just in time to get on Lifeboat 12, the only one that hadn't left, I think.
Yep, I think it was the last lifeboat to go. So they're kind of waiting for the last of the crew and everything. And at this point, we meet the other kind of chaperone.
Yes.
And what's her name, Eva?
Mary Cornish?
Yeah, Mary Cornish.
Okay, and she is a piano teacher and a spinster. And she is chaperoning. She's kind of like the girl chaperone. And she doesn't want to get on the lifeboat because she doesn't know if all of her girls made it on lifeboats yet. But in the end, somebody tells her the girls all got on lifeboats, so she climbs in too.
And then I think it was the older brothers who helped Father O'Connor?
Sullivan.
O'Sullivan?
Yeah, Father O'Sullivan.
O'Connor, O'Sullivan, or something.
But that was another reason why they weren't with their brothers. Just...
Well, and their brothers had been in the infirmary, but they rescued the priest because he was trapped in his room.
I think
by
so.
A couple people were killed instantly by the torpedoing, but he was trapped, and so the two boys got him out. So Lifeboat 12 goes into the water, and I think at this point it's already over its supposed to be capacity, right?
I think so.
Most of the lifeboats, when they got into the water, they flipped over or got lots of water in them, or like crashed down into the water from very high up. But because Lifeboat 12 was delayed for so long, probably somewhat due to Mary, right? Like, she might have delayed it a little bit longer.
I think it had more to do with the location of Lifeboat
Okay.
12, because they said that the lifeboats on one side, I can't remember which one, had a lot more problems than the lifeboats on the other side.
I'm guessing because the boat was probably tipping this way or something.
Yeah, I'm sure it had to do with how long. Do you remember how long it took the boat to sink?
30 minutes?
Yeah, I think it was like 30 minutes for the boat to sink, so it wasn't a very long time. So Lifeboat 12 manages to get in without
falling over.
Without much. Yeah, it goes well. They get in right. And then what happens?
And can I say what happened to Lifeboat 8?
Yes.
Well, it turns out the coat saved Ken's life because all of Lifeboat 8, no one survived off of Lifeboat 8.
Yeah, it kind of got stuck weird and everybody was thrown from it when it was being lowered. It got caught on one end or something. So it was not a good lifeboat to be in, but it was the one he was supposed to be in. So it gets in the water, and then what happens for the next little bit?
Basically they just try to row as far away as they possibly can from the sinking boat and spill water out of the boat too, so they go faster.
Also try to pick up more passengers.
Yeah, they did pick up quite a few people closer to the boat before they kind of paddled away. They had some sort of weird device that you pumped to move, I guess. I didn't really understand the mechanics of it. Do you remember what it was called?
No.
I don't either. But anyway, so they pulled up a bunch of people, and there was this one particular crew member that swam around rescuing people. So it looks like there were 46 people on the lifeboat at least. So probably double the capacity, a very, very full lifeboat. So they get out of the way, and then what do?
They basically just drift, right?
Well, they meet up with another lifeboat, right?
Oh, yeah.
The other ship that was torpedoed had 2 lifeboats, I think maybe just 2 lifeboats. It was a merchant ship, so it was probably not very populated with people. And one of the lifeboats didn't have a lot of water, and it ended up drifting kind of out where Lifeboat 12 was, and so the two captains kind of discussed, and that lifeboat decided they were going to start heading towards Ireland. So they parted. But they figured out how much, that they had a certain number of days worth of
8
water.
days.
Was it 8 days?
I think so.
Of water available. If everybody has, like, almost no water. So they were allowed, like, 2 dipperfuls a day.
I think so.
Basically just enough to survive, I think.
Yeah. So not very much water. They had more food than water. They didn't have enough water for sure.
And when they tried to get more water by rainwater on their umbrella, I think it was?
I think it was a sail.
A sail. It was just too salty from
The salt on the sail, yeah.
condensation.
Yeah. Yep. The salt was on the sail and it made the water too salty. And so, of course, they had to explain to the kids, you can't drink the seawater because you'll go crazy. And one of the men does go crazy and ends up jumping into the water. So they are adrift for multiple days. After that first day, they decide to start kind of trying to head towards Ireland as well, using their whatever the device was that you pump. So what were some of the really terrible things they had to deal with aboard the lifeboat, besides, like, lack of water?
Trench foot.
Trench foot, yeah. Quite a few of the kids and crew, I'm imagining, ended up with trench foot from just their feet being in water all the time.
And you couldn't really move. I mean, you might be able to, but if you weren't really skilled at moving on it, you might knock the whole boat over.
Yeah, so they kind of arranged the boat with the British sailors in the back, maybe,
I think so.
and then all of the Indian sailors. Do you remember what they were called?
Lascars?
Lascars, yeah. They had a whole bunch of sailors that didn't speak any English, so there was one of them that spoke English. They kind of worked as a go-between between that part of the crew and the British part of the crew. And then they had all the passengers up front. So the passengers in the lifeboat were 6 boys. Father O'Sullivan, Mary Cornish, and then a businessman named Ohdan, Bowden Nagorski. And yeah, he was a merchant that was meeting up with his wife and daughters in Canada. And he had a whole bunch of money, so they ended up calling him the millionaire. So they got trench foot, they had no water, they couldn't move around. I think they only had 6 blankets to share between the 46 people, and most of the Lascars were wearing very light clothing because they had been sailing from India and weren't really planning on this side trip to Canada. So what else happened? So they're out there in the ocean.
They start to lose hope, like interest in life, basically. That's one of the main things that the chaperones especially are worried about with the kids.
Mm-hmm. And so what's kind of their solution for how to keep the kids
Telling
occupied?
Stories with cliffhangers.
Yeah, so the piano teacher kind of tells this complicated story involving
Bulldog?
like
Bulldog? I don't remember.
yeah, bulldog something. It was like a character that was common in like British
Adventure stories
at the point in time. So she inserts all of the boys into the story as well, which is pretty cute. And so she tells just a little bit of the story every day, but they aren't getting rescued, and they're not getting rescued. So even, I think, Mary starts to lose hope, so she has a hard time keeping the story going towards the end. So who kind of takes over and helps her with the story?
Ken.
And all the boys, like, they all
Yeah.
kind of chip in.
Yes, they offer some suggestions. But Ken in particular is like, well, this or this. And so
They need the keys, and in the end, the keys are piano keys.
yep. So, and then rescue appears to be coming in what form?
First, it's a ship, and the ship comes really, really close, and then it turns around and leaves.
And this is on like day 7, maybe. Like they've been adrift for a while. They're almost out of water, and they see a ship, and they're all excited. And then the ship turns around and leaves, and doesn't come back. So how does the actual rescue happen?
It's a plane of some sort. It's the boat plane.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that type of plane.
I don't remember the name of it, but Ken was really into planes, so he knew it was a specific type of plane. Because at first they're like, no, don't wave at that plane. What if it's an enemy plane? But then he's like, no, I know this plane. So that person does see them. They use like a complicated flag waving system to identify themselves. The pilot sees them. They signal to him who they are. And he has to leave because he's low on fuel, but another plane flies out and drops off food. And then, did it have a note saying that the
I think it did.
boat was about 40 minutes away? So do you remember what the boat was that saved them?
I think it was. I can't remember the name.
It was St. Anthony.
Yeah, HMS Anthony, which was his, the name of the patron saint of the lost, pulls up and they rescue them. So they're not in good shape upon rescue, and so they're all taken basically directly to the infirmary. And their clothes are taken away, but Ken's like, don't take my coat.
Taking the coat.
Yeah.
Don't take the coat. And they're given sailors' clothes that are too big for them, but still better than what they were wearing, and they get to eat, and they all end up making themselves sick because they haven't eaten in so long. So what happens next? They land.
And when they get home, their parents are waiting. Most of their parents, anyway. Ken's aren't there, but
I don't know that they're there immediately. I think once they have them there, it's not like they sent word while they were still on the ship.
Yeah.
They send them telegrams saying, you know, your kid will be here, you can come get them, or we can get them to you eventually. And Ken's parents send back a telegram saying, please, you know, send him back when you can. Because they don't have the money or the time to go pick him up, so that's a little sad. But he actually deals with it pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
He's kind of grown up a lot in this, don't you think?
yeah, he's one of the kids who's kind of, he has to be strong for the younger ones because he's one of the oldest, and they look up to him, and if he freaks out or something, they kind of all freak out.
Mm-hmm. So he ends up just going with one of his friends and their parents, at least back to the train station where his dad is waiting for him. And then his stepmom makes the statement about
The bicycle.
being able to look at his bike and not cry. So he's back home and safe. And what do all the neighbors do?
They all chip in to buy him a welcome home gift.
A watch with his name inscribed in it. And when the author interviewed him, he still had it, and she could take a picture of it.
Yeah, that was cool. So,
Hold it together, Shy.
so what do they find out about the other lifeboats? Let's see if I can find that watch. Here's the watch. So he still had it when the author interviewed him. So what did they find out about all the other lifeboats? Why did they not go looking for Lifeboat 12?
Because one of the merchant ship lifeboats got counted as a lifeboat from that ship.
Yeah, they knew they were looking for 12 lifeboats, but they didn't ever really think about the fact that the merchant ship had the 2 lifeboats. Do we know what happened to that other merchant lifeboat?
I
Don't
think so.
remember.
I don't know if it ever said. That's actually kind of like interesting. So of the 90 kids Oh, so they did pick up several lifeboats full of survivors, but not all of the kids, obviously. Not all 90 kids made it out. So was it 13? I believe they left on the 13th. They arrived 13 days later on the 26th back to Britain, and 13 total kids survived, if I remember correctly. So 13 was a pretty lucky number. Charlotte's losing it over there.
Yep.
So, but 2 of the kids that did not make it were the little brothers of the 2 boys in the lifeboat. So that's the part that Charlotte spoiled for me ahead of time.
That's the part where I cried most, because the parents' reaction to the older brothers, who are like sobbing because they couldn't save their brothers.
The parents were pretty happy to have them back, even if they lost one.
Yeah. So, anything else we need to say about this book? Besides, you should go read it.
Well, probably Charlotte needs to go have some breathing time.
Yeah, Charlotte's going to have to go cry in a corner for a little bit. But no, this is a really spectacular book. I think it was so well written. Being written in verse, it was like, that could be something that could be done terribly or it could be done really well. And I feel like she did a great job of writing this book in a manner that you really got to know the character of Ken and got to feel the struggles he went through. But it doesn't take very long to read because there's just not that many words on a page.
Like, for me, the getting to know the character really helps. And the fact that I could read it quickly also really helps, because sometimes there's a book that's so long that I just give up in disgust eventually, even if it's really good.
So it's a fast book to read on a fascinating time in history, a fascinating kind of real life story, and so well researched. I was impressed by the people she interviewed and the pictures in the back and all the details. And she tried to find out details of like the Lascar crew members, because they didn't even have names of them, kind of due to the racism of that point in history. Just like, and 31 crew members, Lascar crew. So, I think she did a fabulous job on this book. Any final thoughts?
Bring tissues with you when you start reading the book.
Might want some tissues. Okay. Well, thank you for watching. Please let us know below if you've read this book or if we've inspired you to do so. And we will see you next time. Thanks. Bye.